Welcome, everybody, to episode 15 of the Beyond Red and Blue podcast. I'm your host, Bo Richards, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Dan Humphrey.
Greetings and salutations.
Hope everyone's doing well today. Today, we wanted to do a little bit of a continuation from last week. There was some things that we talked about in our discussion on gratitude that sort of led me to the idea of today's podcast, and that is planning, or the idea of planning, the concept of making plans and sticking to them and aiming for things and goal setting and the like. And so to start, I'll tie in the last week's podcast and why, what it reminded me of, and then I figured we could just jump right into it. On last week's podcast, the first thing that came up was something that you had said, Dan, about how when you worked as a barista, was that right? About 20 years ago?
Yes, sir.
You would surprise guests and ask them what they're grateful for.
Yep.
And then you also mentioned that separately from that, you would sometimes write 3 things you are grateful for every day.
Correct.
Which is, I've actually heard that from multiple different like self-help gurus and other things about how to like sort of improve your outlook on life, is to talk about grateful things you're grateful for. I'm pretty sure I even did it in like a course, like a team building course at work. We definitely, I'll share a story once I'm done here about something that kind of reminds me of this, where and my old coworkers and I, we had to talk about one thing we liked about everyone that we worked with. And there's this funny joke that my girlfriend and I used to work together, that we still use because of what she liked about me in the meeting. And so remind me to bring that up once we're done here. Because it's funny. But and so those things reminded me of they reminded me of sort of aiming towards something and then making a plan to achieve it, right? And then the aim is generally to have a more positive outlook on life. And so part of the plan is like, well, how can you do that? It's by having you think proactively about positive thoughts. So you think about things that you're grateful for. Usually you're not thankful for negative things. Like, I'm thankful that there's world hunger and that racism exists. No one says those kinds of things, right? Because that's crazy. And so you're thankful for the good things in your life, the things that make you happy or what have you. And that tends to breed positive emotion. And then you sort of aim your way towards that, and then talking about it as the plan, and then you slowly but very surely achieve it. And so, and then the second thing was when I talked about one of the things that I'm grateful for, which is love. Love of my family and my friends and the people around me. And it reminded me of a similar thing where it helps reorient me in a direction that is positive for both myself and the people in my life. And so it's a good way for me to recalibrate and formulate a new plan from time to time in order to achieve goals that would seem to me to be of benefit to myself and those that, I directly affect. And so that's where this came from for me. And yeah, I figured from there we'd kick it off. I'm curious with you, if you'll tell me a bit about what it is, how you feel about planning. Like, are you a big planner? Are you a procrastinator? Do you like to just wing it? What's kind of your style?
I guess it kind of depends on what I'm doing. And in the interest of transparency, there is a distinct difference between what I know and what I actually do. So okay. my personal discipline and application of planning varies from time to time. That said, I think particularly when it comes to things that are not necessarily of a super creative nature, and I'm kind of coming at this backwards, but I'll bring it around. If you just got stuff that you need to get done, or if you are working towards a particular goal, whether it's a small or large goal, the best way to actually get that done is to kind of map that out in terms of a plan. And really, it's creating the thing mentally first, creating the result that you're looking for, and then dissecting what actually needs to happen to bring that to life, so to speak. And in that sense, it requires planning, and the better you can get at planning, typically the better your results are going to be. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at there initially.
Okay. And so to recap, if I understand, generally you prefer or like to plan with things that you consider non-creative. Did I summarize that about right?
Yeah, essentially. And well, okay, so for me, and this may be just a personal thing as a creative person, like I need to make stuff, whether or not I'm consciously doing it or not. I would just inevitably will end up creating something or other, whether it's, woodworking, metalworking, leatherworking, digital assets, filmmaking, audio, all that. That's just part of who I am, is I got to make stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed in my life that times where I'm really, really committed to planning the things that I'm doing, I can get a lot of shit done, but my creative juices don't really flow as well.
Okay.
So it's kind of a balance for me of, if I'm doing something creative, give myself the latitude to just kind of explore and see what happens. But if I'm, working a project or work in general, if I'm doing an event, I work in the event industry doing lighting. So if we have an event coming up and I'm getting ready to do a setup, then I get very, very deep into planning in terms of where stuff is going to go, how we're going to get it there, how I'm going to pack the vehicle, all that kind of thing. So if it's a thing that needs to get done that I already know what it is and I just need to execute the steps, then that's, obviously the perfect time to make as detailed a plan as you can. Not to say that your plans aren't flexible, and, obviously you need to be able to adapt. I think Winston Churchill summed it up the best, saying that plans are useless, but planning is essential.
Yeah.
And that really just kind of encapsulates the mental exercise of creating it in your head first, whatever it is, but remaining flexible so you can adapt and overcome when it actually comes to the real world and executing on those things. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's part of the because I make a lot of notes for our podcast. Today's actually pretty light. I have about 1,200 words. Usually I have close to 2,000, I think. But I probably often only get to about a quarter of it just based on the flow of our conversation.
Yeah.
But it follows that principle you were talking about with Winston Churchill in particular. I have an idea of the things that I want to discuss or that I think are important or interesting, and I write them down so that I can remember them and reference them if I need to, but I don't have to go to them. It does, however, give me a good guideline to the flow of the conversation versus just going in completely dark and having to think in my head on the spot, especially as we record, shit, what's a good answer for that? Or what's a good question follow-up? It's okay, well, I have a whole host of things that I may never get to, but at least I've done the work to sort of understand exactly, what it is I may want to counter with or answer, right? It kind of reminds me a little bit, we always talk about jujitsu. It reminds me sort of that. I'm not gonna, if you compete, you may have an idea of what you want to do. You want to have a crouch stance so the person doesn't jump guard. You want to get a collar tie and then do an ankle pick. They try and get you into guard. You do a knee slide pass into, half or into side control, and then you mount them and choke them. I win. That's great. But none of that's ever going to actually happen, right? Yeah. But none of that's never going to happen. However, if you practice it and you go through it and you work on all the different maneuvers within that sequence to get good at them, when they do present themselves individually at different times, all of a sudden it makes things a lot easier for you because you're not flummoxed as to what to do when you get to side control, right? You're well, I already knew what I was going to do here, so I'm just going to proceed, even if you get there in an unconventional way. Yeah, I like that. Do you find, would you consider yourself good or bad at planning, and why?
I guess it depends on how we're defining good.
That's why I asked. Yeah. So
when
use your own definition. Yeah. Use your own definition for good.
when I do it, it's effective. I think that's the ultimate way to define it. It's maybe not the most detailed as some people who, for example, may enjoy planning.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the outcome is to be able to execute that plan and get the result I'm looking for. So when I do that, yeah, it's generally very successful.
I hate planning. I do not like it at all. It's I've been a fly by the seat sort of last minute do things kind of a person most of my entire life, at least my young adult life. And as I got into my mid to late 20s, I started to realize that that's effective when you're in shitty public schools, as an example. And like we've talked about before, like school was easy for me, so like I didn't need to plan anything. I could just do it the day of, and nothing was ever an issue, But then I've started to realize that as I've gotten older and things have gotten harder, and I've wanted to try and be better at things. Like that's a big part of it, is trying to get better at things. I've found that I have to plan more, because just winging it doesn't work for me. I tend to have subpar results compared to what I know I'm capable of, or what I believe I'm capable of, and what I'd like. So it's fun, and I loosely air quote fun there, because I've had to basically force myself to plan things out daily for the last 2 years in order to be better, say at my old job, my new job, at jiu-jitsu, my personal life, my relationship with my spouse or my family, my friends and whatnot. And it's interesting to have a love-hate relationship with it, because I just don't like to do it, but I've been doing it for so long. I have multiple planners now. I have a workout planner. I have a daily planner for things I'm going to do in the day. I have a planner for work for my boss to look at. I don't know if he looks at it, but I make it so that way he knows what I'm doing, and he knows stuff he needs to do if he pays attention. And every time I do it, I'm like, I hate this. It's early in the morning. It's 7 o'clock in the morning when I do it. I'm like, I just don't want to do this. But every time I don't, my day just gets derailed. And the end of the day, I'm stressed and I got nothing done. And I know that when I plan shit, things just go better. Because whenever I have you ever get those moments where you're kind of overwhelmed with stuff to do?
Oh yeah.
And it's I can just go back to the planner and be like, okay, well, I'm just going to start at the top. I'm not going to worry about what I'm stressed about. I'm just going to say, well, have I done the first thing on my list? No. Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to turn everything off and just do that, and then just work my way down. And then all of a sudden everything just gets easier. It's interesting how that works. I imagine that sometime soon I'll start to move from a love-hate relationship to just a love relationship for planning. But I think it's such a fundamental antithesis of my personal nature. I think it'll take me many years to really reconcile that and actually start to enjoy planning, because it isn't something I necessarily enjoy. It's more of something I found to be a necessity that makes me a higher functioning individual,
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you enjoy the results.
Yes.
And that speaks to the concept of self-discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And really the way I like to look at self-discipline is doing the things that you should be doing when you should be doing them, regardless of how you feel about it at the time.
Yeah.
So if you have a daily planner and you put down your items for the day, you may get to 4 p.m, you're tired, you got a headache, whatever. But if you look back and say, okay, I committed to myself to do this next thing, and regardless of how I feel about it right now, I'm still going to do it. And the more you can harness that, I think the more effective that you can be, the more successful your planning is going to be, and just your life in general.
Agreed. The daily habit of it is something that personally I've grown accustomed to. I actually do planning on the weekends, and if I don't, on a Saturday, I actually feel a little bit off for the day because I haven't written stuff to do, even though I do less things naturally on a Saturday. But you mentioned discipline, and so I'm going to talk about Jocko Willink for a second.
My man.
Yeah, because he's a big proponent. He's got a book called Discipline Equals Freedom, and that's had a profound change in my life. And I remember when I first heard it, and I've actually heard people talk about this too, but when I first heard it, I was very confused by the notion that discipline equals freedom. You know, on a surface level, it kind of seems like, oh, if you're being super disciplined, you're just kind of restricting the things that you can do, which doesn't seem like there's a lot of freedom in that, right? It seems
Seems like the
counterintuitive.
exact opposite.
Yeah, just by nature of discipline being restrictive in and of itself, and it's an interesting dichotomy, and but I've talked about this a little bit before in past episodes, but I was in a rut at work and very stressed and unhappy, and I was like, well, I don't got whatever I'm doing is not working, so let's try and figure this shit out. And I just also read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, which had a profound effect on me as well. And so I started to organize my work days, because workload isn't constant. Most people, most jobs, you don't go into work and you have the same amount to do at the same times every day, and it doesn't vary, right? Like factory workers on industrial lines might have that.
Right.
I think Fred Flintstone had that working in the quarry, right? But most people, you go in and you have lulls in the day, and you have hugely busy parts of the day that just overwhelm the shit out of you. And then there's like that deep valley where you're exhausted and you have nothing to do. And it tends to go in peaks and valleys like that. And so oftentimes what I would find would happen is, things that would be considered urgent did not make their way into my inbox at the same time every day. And so like people would call and they'd want stuff when I'm in the middle of something, but it would be quote unquote urgent. And so I would handle that, and then I'd get behind on something else. And I'd hit the end of the day and none of the stuff I actually needed to get done would get done. And I'd be like, I come home, my girlfriend would be like, what'd you do today? How'd your day go? And I'd be like, it was horrible. I got nothing done. And I just feel useless. And I was like, well, and then other days I'd come in and I'd have nothing to do. No, because I was a salesman for years. And so no one would call me back. No one would email me. And I would just kind of like listlessly sit there and like not really know what to do. And it's like, well, I'm just going to start writing shit out. Like, here are the things I have to do every day. This is important. Number one, these things aren't urgent. I actually at one point followed a Tim Ferriss recommendation in his book. It's the only recommendation, or one of two recommendations I followed from his book. He recommends that you set up an auto forward on your email, telling people that you're too busy to answer emails. You're going to answer them like once a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, you ask that they respect your time so you can be more efficient, and you'll get back to them at whatever time. And so I just set that up on my work email without telling my boss. And it took like all of like one day for someone to get like a customer to get angry and to email my boss about it.
Oh.
And so she came to me and she's like, you can't do this because clients think you're too busy to take care of them. And I was like, I am. That's why I did the email forward, is because I'm actually busy doing other things. My job is to sell stuff, not to answer questions. That's counterintuitive to what my job is. Right. And, I don't have time to answer questions about why someone's bill is the way that it is. That's why you have someone else for that. And, but I started to notice though, that as I went through and did these things and I checked them off, that my sales dramatically increased. I started to have like more consistent days. People were getting back to me more. There was very few lulls in the day. And from that, I was able to work out something with my boss where I started to work part-time with a full-time paycheck because I was making more money for my boss. And so I basically was able to do kind of what Tim Ferriss suggests in the 4-Hour Workweek, which is to reduce your hours. Instead of working 40 hours, I was working like 30 or 25. I forget which. It was in between. It kind of depended, but, and my pay increased, which is something that's interesting. And all as a result of that discipline, right? And then I turned that into helping our jiu-jitsu instructor, Brian, with teaching kids classes, because they're during the day when I used to work and I wanted to teach them. So, and then that turned into my new job, which I had the freedom from being disciplined to get this new job that I like, very much more. And so it was one of those times where directly employing the thing that the counterintuitive saying that, Jocko has of discipline equals freedom literally worked for me. I was disciplined in my actual job, which gave me the freedom to pursue a passion that became another job. And now I don't have to do my old job, which I don't like. So,
dude, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been, obviously with the pandemic, I'm not really doing the job as much anymore, right. But because our job would probably just kill everybody. But so it's kind of a bummer at the moment. But yeah, it was as I was writing up the notes, I was like, I kind of forgotten about that, and then I realized, holy shit! Like, as a direct result of planning this out, like I didn't plan it all so that I would be able to leave my job and teach jujitsu full time, but it just staying disciplined through it gave me the freedom to do so. And it was hard. It sucked. I had a lot of battles with my boss over it because, what kind of a boss wants to sit there and listen to you tell them that you're going to work part-time for the same amount of money? Right? Like that seems really dumb on their part.
Yeah.
It's like, but it took me.
Sell them on it.
Yeah. It actually wasn't that hard. In hindsight, I was really nervous at first, but I just worked really hard. My sales went up, and then I was like, look, I'm burnt out. I don't want to be here. So I'm going to work 2 or 3 hours less every day for 2 weeks or a month. And if my sales don't go up, I'll come back to work full time. But if my sales go up, I would like to continue to do this indefinitely. And I'd worked really hard, so there was a reasonable chance that residual would come back to me and I would actually sell more regardless of how hard I worked with part-time.
Nice, yeah.
So I was banking on that, and it actually came to fruition. And then I still worked hard, so I still managed to keep my sales numbers up and do well. But I knew there was a reasonably high success rate because of that fact. Because for those who are listening who are unfamiliar with sales in general, it's not really a constant thing. You have to consistently be working to generate new people to talk with, but it's really difficult. One of the hard things with being a salesman is oftentimes you'll have, again, peaks and valleys of lots of people. You'll have like a rush of people who want stuff, and then you'll have a dearth where like no one's buying anything. And that can be seasonal. That could just be maybe on Thursdays every week you have a shitty Thursday, no one calls you back, but everyone does it on Monday. It doesn't matter. And so the trick is to try and even that out. But if you put in a lot of work to generate new stuff, it takes maybe a week or 2, 3. It kind of depends on what profession you're in, but it tends to come back after a while. Like after a while, people will finally follow up with you. They may wait 2 weeks, but they'll call you back. And so I knew that coming up to this, like if I just worked my ass off for like 2 weeks before I asked this, that all that stuff would just come to fruition. And it would just increase. Yeah, I was like, it would increase my chances that this would succeed. And I was like, you know what? And if it does, then I have to work really hard to keep it, right? Because I do 1 month of good sales, I work part-time, and then I fail. My boss is going to make me come back full-time, right? I was like, so it's on me. I have the responsibility. And again, we talk about that personal responsibility, but to make sure that I'm working my ass off when I'm at work, and that was the other thing, is that I started to realize as I was being disciplined and as I was making my plans for the day, is that 2 to 3 hours of the day, I had nothing to do before I made plans and after. Before, when I didn't make plans, I would just get tired in the middle of the day and just goof off around lunch, and then for an hour after lunch or an hour beforehand. And I think studies estimate that the average office worker spends like 3 to 4 hours on Facebook a day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it was like, well, when I started to plan everything, by the time lunch came around, I took a late lunch at like 2, I had all my stuff done. So I had nothing to do. And I was exhausted because I'd gotten all my stuff done. It was very intensive. And I was like, well, what if I just cut the hours that I'm tired and have nothing to do? Like, instead of just fucking off, I could just do more work, but I'm a human. So I only have so much I can do before I'm just unproductive. And Yeah, it was very fortunate. I know a lot of people don't really have the ability to do that, but anyone listening who at least works in an office, I guarantee you there's a way for you to work less and make more money by making plans and being disciplined about a way to do it. So I'd recommend, just as a side note, to do that. It's totally worth it. And then start jujitsu with your free time.
There you go.
Because it's quite amazing. But yeah, do you? I've kind of rambled a bit there about how this has kind of worked out for me. Is there a time in your life that you can think of where you've really doubled down on and committed to making plans to sort of change your life, and you've seen the benefits of it? You'd mentioned writing about 3 things you're grateful for every day. I'm curious maybe if that's an experience you want to expand upon.
Sure. At that time, so a lot of this, maybe a little history lesson here. A lot of this circles around in 1997. I got in a pretty nasty motorcycle accident. I was standing still, got hit by a car. My leg was crushed. So it put me out for a little bit, so to speak. Was very fortunate. Didn't have any nerve damage or anything, but it was still a pretty significant injury. I had a bunch of titanium in my leg now and all that kind of stuff. And prior to that is when I was first exposed to some of these types of conversations and material, different books, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Tony Robbins and all that kind of thing. So when I was recovering from that, I kind of took that as an opportunity to test out some of this material in terms of, positive mental attitude and planning and discipline and things like that. So I was fairly new into working out just prior to the accident. I'd been working out for, a couple of years, discovered the gym and, lift weights, get big muscles and chicks like it type of thing. So for my rehab, because I didn't have any official rehab, I just kind of had to figure it out on my own. I took that as the opportunity to kind of double down on these principles and see how far I could take my fitness, so to speak. And got super disciplined, didn't miss workouts, wrote down every single calorie that I ate, and I planned out all of my meals and I planned out all of my workouts. I wrote them down as I was doing them. I still have those logs somewhere. And yeah, it was effective. I ended up entering a natural bodybuilding contest. Important to say natural because there's natural and not natural, and the two are very different. But entered a natural bodybuilding contest in 2000 and ended up winning my weight class, which was actually very unexpected. I was hoping maybe to get top 5 because the way they do it is for all the competitors that show up in the morning and they do the actual judging, and then the stuff that you would see on TV or if you ever go to a bodybuilding show, they call it the night show, and that's just more for the crowd. So you get judged in the morning, and if you get within the top 5, then you get to do the night show.
Okay,
so really my goal was just like, hey, I just want to get the night show, top 5. I can do that.
Because awesome. Of all the girls, they could see the muscles, right?
That's right. I was in front of 3,000 people in my underwear. So yeah, I mean, I would say that's very, a tangible result rather that I could point to. Yeah.
Dude, that's amazing. I didn't know that about you.
Mm-hmm.
And when did you stop professional bodybuilding? Or amateur, sorry, or
I was never professional.
Natural bodybuilding.
Yeah, I just did a couple of shows, and the thing is it's a ton of effort. It's basically all I was doing.
Yeah.
Like I was working a little bit as a personal trainer to make some money, and then pretty much every other minute of the day was focused in some way toward that goal.
Okay.
And so after I did that in 2000, I was like, well, I can let up a little bit. Obviously, I'm still gonna be working out and stuff, but I basically had the feeling that I took myself to at least 95% of my potential.
Sure.
Meaning, I mean, I'm a thin guy, so I'm never going to get huge. I realize that it's just not in my genetics, and that's okay. So to stay that focused was going to be severely diminishing returns in that aspect. But like I say, I was a personal trainer, and I focused a bit more on the career side of things, and ended up getting promoted a few times. And I managed the fitness teams, all the trainers for a couple different gyms, couple different companies, things like that. So it took more of a career path for several years in the fitness industry.
Sure. A couple of questions. These are sort of off tangent from planning, but I've heard a lot of different answers to this. And so I'm curious for you, what was the biggest thing? Because I assume, especially doing well in a bodybuilding competition, that you were able to get yourself down fit enough to where you had, a 6-pack, something to that effect.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I got to find a picture. It's genetically, I will never be big, but I can get really, really, really lean. So,
yeah. And so I'm curious what was the biggest thing for you in terms of achieving that?
For
Is
me,
it just diuretics or
no, didn't do any of that. All of that type of stuff, the diuretics and that nonsense, that's really just trying to shed some of the water weight very briefly before the contest. Very similar to doing a weight cut for mixed martial arts and combat sports in general.
Correct. Yeah.
But prior to that, you want to do something more sustainable. And like I mentioned, I was literally counting every single calorie and my grams of protein and all that. So, I logged everything. I made goals of, I'm going to do this much of a workout. So I want to have this many calories, which theoretically should give me a caloric deficit of say 500 calories. And if I multiply that out over the next couple of weeks, I should lose X amount of body fat.
Yeah.
And then just execute on that plan.
Because from what I understand, the biggest issue with, because, people in particular, as you come up onto the summertime here in the Northwest, everyone's like, how do I get that beach bod? Like, how do I get those abs that all girls love or boys love at the beach? And, you have all those plans that you can buy that'll give you the right foods and the right workouts. And near as I can tell, it's really just diet. That's like the biggest thing, is just, you need to be able to eat good foods and lower your overall body fat percentage, right?
Yeah, diet's definitely the biggest component. And next step would be caloric expenditure.
Yeah.
You just need to make sure that you're burning enough calories. And then tangent to that is your muscle mass. Mm-hmm. And we used to say that's your fat burning machinery. And all that really means is, when you're sitting around doing absolutely nothing, your fat stores don't require a whole lot of calories just to exist, like just a basic metabolism. It doesn't need a whole lot. Whereas muscles require a lot more calories literally just to exist. So the more muscles that you have, the more calories you burn while you sleep, quite literally. Yeah. So by focusing on strength training to build up your fat burning machinery, that becomes a lot more of a winning calculation in your favor when it comes to trying to reduce your calories. So,
what did you do then to burn your fat instead of your muscle when you're in a caloric deficit?
Make sure and strength train. That was the thing. And the idea is, and obviously the actual biology behind this is very complex, but
yes,
metaphorically, you want to give your body a reason to hang on to the muscle. So for example, let's say your caloric needs for the day are 3,000 calories, but you only ate 2,500. Mm-hmm. Well, you got to get the 500 calories from somewhere. And the interesting thing about the human body and the function of fat, among other things, is as a caloric store. It's very calorically dense, so it's an efficient way to hang on to calories if you're going to need them later. And
for starvation, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. In a survival sense, that's why we evolved that way. And your body's going to hesitate to break into savings, if you will, if on the other hand, it's looking at all this fat burning machinery that you've got, and it's kind of like, doing a rental on a whole fleet of cars that you're not actually using.
Sure.
You're calorically paying for stuff that you're not using, meaning you have all this muscle, but if you're not using it, your body will break it down. which will then make it more efficient. And ultimately, it will try to balance itself out so that it doesn't need to have access to as many calories just to maintain.
Sure.
So if you prioritize your fat burning machinery, meaning by strength training, you give your body a signal that no, we're using this muscle. We need this muscle. We can't get rid of this because we're using it every day. Let's just go ahead and tap into the fat stores and we'll get calories from there.
Got it. Yeah. That my assumption then is that must be a reason why virtually all of our hunter-gatherer ancestors were extraordinarily lean. It's because they're consistently running around. Like they would hunt up to 12, 20 miles a day.
Sure. Yeah.
And then depending on the food that they were hunting for, it would be fairly lean meats. And then so they don't get a lot of fat just naturally to begin with. Now, did you do more of like a high carb or a low carb, like keto, paleo style diet with your training?
At that time, keto and Atkins. This is actually was the time around Atkins way back when.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was typically in bodybuilding circles. That was more reserved for a couple weeks out before a show,
because you're more likely to burn your fat stores at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
But in general, this was still when low fat was all the thing. So it was make sure you have X amount of protein to sustain your muscles, then get some good carbs in there. And it can be like, white rice and whatever. Obviously, times have changed and we've gotten better about dietary strategies. But it was just, my priority was to make sure I get enough protein to sustain the muscle and then create a caloric deficit, and super low fat was the idea at the time. And I definitely want to give a nod to genetics. It's very real. The marketers don't really want to tell you about that. But the reality is everybody's genetics are different.
Yeah.
Meaning it happens to be that for me, I'm a thin guy. So I can, my body is very ready to burn off fat. Mm-hmm. But it's also slow to build muscle. Somebody who is more of a mesomorph or an endomorph, which are different body types. Mesomorph is someone who is prone to build muscle. And typically those are the ones that become the successful bodybuilders. So their bodies respond very rapidly to any stimulus that requires muscle growth. They get big, they get strong really fast. Mm-hmm. However, they typically tend not to burn fat as readily. And an endomorph is kind of, it's more the same, but they just tend to really, really hang on the fat stores.
Yeah.
And, you kind of end up, you bigger round folks.
Trino, one of our black belts, who will actually he'll be a guest on here in the next week or two. Hopefully he's like that. He's been eating a low carb diet for years and he works out religiously, and he's just like, he's got a little bit of a belly.
Yeah. And that's just genetics, which really in an evolutionary sense, that's not a bad thing at all.
No.
When the apocalypse comes, so to speak, skinny dudes like me are going to be in tough shape because we're going to be scrapping for food. Whereas someone who already has some fat stores, they can go a lot longer and then keep on trucking.
Right.
So it kind of depends on the context that you're looking at in terms of, photos of yourself on the internet. Mm-hmm. Being lean is probably a good thing, but surviving the zombie apocalypse, not so much.
Sure. With all the new, do you keep up at all with like the new ways to like train and bodybuild and eat and diet and all that? Have you kind of updated yourself with that?
Yeah. I mean, and it's mainly peripherally. I listen to a lot of Joe Rogan, and Rogan talks about that kind of stuff. So I absorb a lot of that, which is great. It just happens to be another item of interest for me. So I enjoy those conversations. And the methodologies have changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
But bear in mind, to set the context, human biology has not changed a lick in, say, 200,000 years. So, all this, new and fancy, and this is the one diet. It's like, well, we're using the same machinery. So it's not like there's going to be a magic pill that is going to revolutionize everything. It's the same concepts. It's a more refined understanding of calories in versus calories out.
Yep.
And you can get deeper into what type of calories that you have and what requirements that your body has. And if you're going full on carnivore, that's going to change your physiology a little bit. But ultimately, it's just that caloric exchange. If you're trying to lose weight, it's a caloric exchange. If you're trying to lose body fat, it's a caloric exchange with a specific prioritization to encourage your body to burn that fat.
Right, exactly. I remember when I was in college, a buddy of mine, he did what was essentially a weightlifting competition, or a kind of like a competition you did. It was for a philanthropy. It wasn't a bodybuilding thing, but he spent a year and got into absurd shape. He ended up winning the thing, and it was just like incredible to see his body transformation. But he had mentioned specifically kind of what you had mentioned, and that he had done a high carb, low fat diet. So he had a crap ton of rice and chicken for like a year. That's basically what he ate, and a bunch of different types of protein powders and creatines and the like. But and then once like every 3 months, he'd have like a Michelob Ultra, and get super fucked up because he hadn't drank in months, but the week or two before he did the competition, he cut out all of his carbs and basically just ate steak. And I remember seeing him before he started it and then afterwards. And like, that's where the dramatic change is made. And he didn't do any diuretics or anything either, because they can be tough on your body. But I think he lost in that 2 weeks, he lost 15 pounds, and it was all body fat. Probably a little bit, I'm sure a good amount of it was water weight, but the vast majority of it was body fat, and he just was like shredded. And it was impressive to see like the discipline and the diligence. I'm curious kind of then what your take is on how you feel about low carb versus carb style diets, like your personal preference.
Well, for me personally, evidence suggests that my body responds pretty well to carbohydrates.
Okay.
I've done low carb stuff before, and it wasn't necessarily all that dramatic for me in terms of the results. I mean, it works, but it's a pain in the butt for sure. And I count, that's something I am grateful for, is that my metabolism is pretty quick. And when I do eat carbohydrates, they tend to get burned up pretty readily.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned I thought was interesting is that, our bodies haven't really changed much for a very long time. And we've had this push in particular in the US for processed and, refined carbs in all of our foods for at least 50, 60, 70 years, since the 40s, right? Oh, yeah. So 80 years now. It's been a long time. And so two things. One, I saw an interesting meme on Instagram. This person, it was a picture of like a sack of like wheat or like rice or whatever. And it's like, we feed grains to get chickens fat, and yet we eat bread in order to lose weight. And it made me think of that. It made me chuckle, because it's like, okay, like, we have this idea in our culture that, we need to eat all of these carby style foods and cut out fats, and then we'll lose weight. And yet, like you mentioned yourself, you respond well to carbs. I don't. I've, on 2 separate occasions, without having a caloric deficit, have been diligent about being on low to no carbs, and I've lost 14 pounds, 15 pounds each time in the span of a week or two without even noticing it. My body just sheds the fat. it isn't like I get massive amounts of energy. I don't get sick. Like I don't feel ill or anything. All of a sudden, like one day my pants don't fit and I realize that I've just lost a bunch of body fat. And because I think it's just how my body responds to fats versus carbs. And the biggest takeaway I found from it is because I hate diets. I hate the term diet and like the Atkins diet or the keto diet even, or the paleo or the Mediterranean, or the diet is such a negative connotation to me because it's like you need to restrict how much food you eat so that you can look good for 2 months out of the year. And my old boss, she was very large for a long period of time. And she went on this diet that's here locally. It's called Ideal Protein. Okay. And I don't know what was all in the diet, but she ate a shit ton of jicama, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with what that is, but it's like
what is that?
It's like a water chestnut. It looks like and has a similar texture to like an apple without the outside, the skin. Okay. And it tastes like a water chestnut. There's like no flavor to it. It's just like a crunchy like that, like a pear too. So maybe like a pear, it would be something similar too. But she basically was eating like 900 calories a day. And she lost
much.
No, and she lost 100 pounds in a year.
Yeah.
And like became healthy, quote unquote. But within 3 months, she'd put on 60 pounds because she was eating again. And she was constantly terrible to be around because she was just always angry and upset and had a headache. And it's like, that's one of the things I dislike so much about this notion of like a diet, is that it's like your body needs what your body needs. There, like you said, there isn't one size there isn't one pill that works, like, which is why I don't like this whole carb push. It's like, not everyone should eat carbs. Like there are legitimate populations of people who have evolved to not eat carbs. Like the Inuit, as an example, lived off of seal and whale fat and meat for all of their lives.
Yep.
So
the carb thing, you got to understand that that was entirely market driven.
Oh, 100%.
Refined sugar and flours and things like that. They're cheap.
In some cultures do eat those things. Like a large percentage of Polynesian cultures, they have taro and they have not potatoes, but yams and sweet potatoes and sugar cane. And they've been growing those because they grow best in those kinds of climates for 15,000 years. And so their bodies, to a degree, are kind of evolved for that. Yeah. So they're going to need that versus something else. But like the market, like you said, is market driven, and I hate seeing that stuff. It's like, just eat whatever the fuck you want, but like listen to your body is the biggest thing for me. It's like
that's very key. Is understand how you're responding to it. But here's another thing that does take a bit of discipline, but if you really want to get serious about that, it's being very consistent for a given stretch of time. We'll say, for example, take everything that you normally eat minus one thing, minus bread. Mm-hmm. Everything else is the same. So it's essentially a controlled experiment.
Yep.
And to see how your body responds to that. I personally, I did that one time when I was training more heavily. I did a day and a half fast with somebody I worked with, and I forget even why, but at the time it was just kind of attractive for the sake of the discipline of it. And there's health benefits and stuff. It's like, okay, let's try this fasting thing. So I think effectively it was like 2 days worth of fasting. And the very first thing I ate when I came off of it, and this is something that you can really test to see how your body responds, is after you do a fast or a restriction of some sort, you introduce that one thing and see what happens. I got this apple cinnamon French bread or something. It's like the specialty bread from the Great
that
Baking
sounds
Company.
Delicious.
Oh, it is. It was absolutely amazing. It was, it was a treat for me, obviously. And I just devoured that and felt absolutely fine. Whereas, somebody else I was working with, whatever, they introduced some simple carbs of some sort, and they're like, "Oh man, I got all puffy and I got super tired right away." And it's like, oh, they responded differently. But the moral of the story is if you can control your diet for a given period of time, see how you feel, and then either remove or introduce one single thing and see how your body responds, that can give you some clues. It's obviously not fully scientific, but you can get some useful information out of those types of exercises. But it does take quite a bit of discipline.
It does, yeah. I do that. I've done that a few times with beer, because I don't drink much anymore, and I drink quite a bit less since I drink quite a bit less when I start, because like with anything else, like I'll go like a keto style low carb diet, and then after a few months, like I might introduce a few carbs and just relax a tad bit and then come back on it. And I never eat too many carbs because I just don't really miss them anymore. But especially when I'm really diligent about keeping low carbs, I won't drink beer at all. And every now and again I'll have a beer, and without fail for the last like 5 times over the last like 9 months, I've had maybe 5 beers, and maybe less than that. And every time it just wrecks me. Like I get super dehydrated within like an hour or 2 of drinking the beer. I sleep like shit no matter when I drink it. Like I had a beer, I had a beer last night, and it was a good beer. Like it actually tasted good. Usually they taste bad because I've kind of lost my taste for them, but I had a beer at like 6, 7 o'clock. And by the time we went to bed, I was still very dehydrated. Wasn't drunk at all because it was just a beer. Woke up constantly throughout the night. Woke up with like a dry lips, dry throat, and drank a bunch of water and had to pee a bunch of times. Was a little fuzzy this morning when I got up. Like it could just be old age. Like I could just be getting to the point where whenever I drink, I get hangovers now. But after like, I chugged a glass. I usually drink water in the mornings anyways, just I chug like a glass or something. But after that and having some breakfast, it was fine. But every time I've done that in the last like 9 months or so to a year, that's what happens without fail. And it's led me to realize that I'm, like you said, I'm pretty sure like introducing whatever is inside a beer, the barley, or maybe it's gluten. I don't know. I'm not convinced. I've not done enough research to know if gluten's actually real. I've heard that it's not. So I don't know the validity of that, but
it's a thing.
I'm sure it's a thing, but I remember
the effect of it can be questioned, but it is a thing.
But I heard something about how gluten wasn't actually a real thing. So, but whatever it is, within the beer just doesn't agree with me. And I used to love beer. I used to drink beer all the time, sometimes daily for months at a time, depending on my age. And now I look back and I realize it's probably why I felt like shit for like 6 years. Is A, lots of drinking, but B, just because whatever I was drinking just wasn't setting well. And but yeah, it's fascinating to me as I've delved into the like the personal fitness world, and like the eating, trying to find the right foods and the discipline it takes to figure that out, right? Because I cut out bread first when I first started to go low carb. And I stopped making spaghetti. I got rid of pasta and bread because I used to I love spaghetti. I was like, well, I got to give up spaghetti, which sucks because then I got to give up bread because I put spaghetti on my bread and then eat it like a spaghetti sandwich.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's delicious. And I was like, well, this is gonna suck, but now I don't care, and I feel so much better for it, But it's hard. It's a hard discipline to follow. I think that's the main key. And that actually was one of the things I was going to bring up about planning, is that the discipline required to plan properly is, I think, why a lot of people have a hard time planning.
Oh yeah, for sure. And an experience that I have, at least, is when it comes to discipline, it's almost like an internal switch, meaning if you have the effective internal motivation for whatever it is you're doing, let's say, cutting out bread, if you can manage to focus on those reasons and make an actual decision, the importance of the word decision, meaning that there's no room for discussion internally anymore. Mm-hmm. So, okay, I'm no longer going to eat bread. That's settled. This is no longer up for debate internally. There's going to be no exceptions. This is just the way things are going to be. Then the discussion is just, okay, how am I going to make that happen? How am I going to, deal with cravings and things like that? Versus, let's say, have an external motivation. Someone tells you that you shouldn't be eating bread. And you're like, well, I don't want the social pressure, so I'll agree to it, but I really don't want to.
Yeah.
And that ongoing battle inside your head never goes away. And you're virtually guaranteed to fail. Versus when you settle that issue with yourself, then the discussion doesn't happen anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't mean there are times that you're going to be tempted, but it's the question is never, how can I sneak in this one piece of bread versus, well, bread's not an option. So what am I going to do to either distract myself or eat something else or whatever?
Right.
But you just take that away as an option entirely. And I think it definitely feels like almost a binary switch internally. Like when that clicks in, at least for me, then it's actually not that difficult to have that discipline because you've committed to that outcome versus just kind of being interested in the outcome.
I'm the same way.
Okay. I was just gonna say that, there are plenty of times when I've been interested in something and it very rarely ever works out.
Sure.
But if I can flip that internal switch and say, okay, this is just how it's going to be, then it's actually not all that difficult.
I agree. 'Cause I'm very, very similar. And I think you bring up an interesting point that I was kind of grappling with as I was writing on my notes. And here's what I came up with. Ultimately, I think that it comes down to how bad someone genuinely wants the goal that they're, aiming for.
Yep.
And also temperament. I think they're separate, but temperament plays a part.
True. Yes, I agree.
And I think that, we've talked a lot about like being honest with yourself and personal responsibility and the like. And as I was kind of thinking about planning and how it works and like aiming for a goal and all those kinds of things, it's hard because a lot of the stuff we talk about is so intertwined. But I do actually believe, and I forget which podcast it was, but I'd mentioned that I think that, and I'm paraphrasing, but most people actually, they either willfully lie to themselves or they don't realize that they're not telling themselves the truth about things that they want. Because you can have both. Like you could actively, like you said, you could justify eating a piece of bread because it's not settled in your brain. So like, how can I eat this piece of bread? Or cigarette smoking is probably a better one, because people do that. They'll like sneak a smoke when their spouse isn't looking. Yeah. But it's like, how do they how do they live with themselves as an example while doing that? How do they justify it? And it's because it's a goal you don't genuinely want. And that's a hard thing to like flip that switch. That's not easy to do, but it's simple.
Yeah.
And, but I thought that was very interesting as I was kind of thinking through that. Like, it's kind of been my experience that people say that they want things much more than they actually want them.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. And so which leads me to another interesting realization. It's that people would like things if the effort involved is relatively low. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's no wonder, right? Like if someone was like, smoking's bad for you, or being fat is bad for you, and it's actually really easy to lose weight, and it's not very hard to quit smoking, everyone would do it. If like losing weight was just as simple as getting up in the morning, brushing your teeth, and going outside for a walk, and that's it, everyone would do that. There would be, even if it's cold, people would be like, well, all I have to do is just walk around the block. Like, that's it. The only people who wouldn't are people who can't actually walk around the block, right? There's more to it, and if it was just as simple as just, all you got to do is you're just not going to smoke today. But it's never that easy, because otherwise no one would smoke, because it's fucking terrible for you. And, it makes me think, I realize that once people realize that actual work is needed to achieve something, they tend to bail out, which is hard for me to see personally. But I used to chewing tobacco for years, probably like 6, 7, 8 years, and do it during the day, during work. I got good at hiding it, so my boss never found out, or clients never found out. I remember the day I was like laying on the couch with my girlfriend, and we were talking about New Year's resolutions. I think it was actually around this time of the year, like 3 or 4 years ago now. She kind of asked what my New Year's resolutions were, and I didn't even really think about it. And I was like, one of them, I was like, I want to quit chewing. I don't know why. I still to this day don't know exactly why that one came into my head at the moment. And then that's just what I did. I had a, chew still left to chew. And I was like, well, I'm going to, instead of doing this every day like I normally would, I'm going to like ration it out over 2 weeks to make the withdrawals a little bit easier to deal with. So I'll have half as much as normal, let's say. And then I'm just going to be done. And then 2 weeks later, I had stopped chewing.
Well, I think it sounds like, the switch that you had flipped internally is, this is the last can of chew.
Yeah.
That's it. So we'll stretch it out a little bit, but I am no longer a person that chews.
Yeah.
Versus I'm someone that chews that's trying to cut back or trying to quit, something like that. By flipping that switch internally, you see yourself differently.
Yep.
So if you were to go and buy another can of chew, like what is this? I'm not the kind of person that buys cans of chew. And there's a mismatch there. So
this, I have a nerd alert. I have another nerd story. This reminds me
Harry
of
Potter.
It is Harry Potter, actually. So I have a Harry Potter story. This reminds me of Harry Potter himself. He, I don't think I've ever asked you this, but you have read all of the Harry Potters, right?
No, sir.
Okay. Oh my God.
I've seen I think 2 of the movies. And that's
okay.
it.
So then I'll briefly explain. So starting in book 5, really 4 or 5, it kind of throughout the books, but it really is present in book 5. Harry starts to realize that he's having what he believes are visions of Lord Voldemort in his head. And what's actually happening, and there's a long explanation for this, but he's basically seen inside of Lord Voldemort's mind. They're connected magically. And Professor Dumbledore tells him, you need to start taking lessons from somebody to stop that connection. And there's a way to do that, but you need to shut off your mind to that. And he's horrible at it for a lot of reasons. And the people around him often accuse him for multiple books that he likes the connection and, likes to know what Voldemort's up to and he feels special, whatever. And most of the time he vehemently denies this. He's like, I don't like it at all. It's horrible. Like I see him killing people. It's really bad. But you actually find out that at some point, like it's pretty clear that he finds it useful to be able to see what Voldemort's up to. And so that's part of the reason why he has trouble shutting down the visions. But it isn't until towards the very end of the 7th book when he actually shuts himself off, like he has to forcibly shut his mind off from the visions, that he actually starts to move forward towards the denouement of the story and kill Voldemort. Like it's a very clear shift where one day he's like battling, like staying in the present and letting himself go to see what Voldemort's doing. And he like successfully shuts his mind off and comes to the present and chooses a fork in the road, as it were, what he's going to do. And then he chooses the right one and he ends up winning. And he actually has an internal dialogue where he has to make the right decision and he needs to force himself out of Voldemort's mind in order to make the proper decision. And so it makes me chuckle because it's that dichotomy of like, or not dichotomy, but it's that choice of the discipline of, he doesn't want to admit to people that he likes it and therefore he struggles with it and can't cast it off, whatever it is. In this case, it's these visions. But once he finally makes the decision, everything starts to move forward for him in a positive direction.
Yeah.
Right. And for him, it was, it was whatever the catalyst was. but the catalyst is always interesting for me to see with people, because some people, like, I don't know why I just quit chewing, and it was not hard for me. I barely got withdrawals. I didn't get irritable. I don't miss it. I like the smell of like regular chew, but I've always liked it. So like I can smell, like I actually like the smell. It's something from my childhood.
Sure.
And my dad used to chew when I was a kid. And so like I associate that with being like a young kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I actually don't mind the smell, but I don't smell it and want to dip. I don't, it isn't like a craving that I have. I just don't care anymore. And some people spend their whole lives never being able to quit. And it's a very interesting struggle. That I've often, but I've over the years I've looked into to try. Like I don't understand the psychology behind it.
I think that I'm confident that addiction in general is a very complex topic.
Yeah,
I think that there's bio-individuality, meaning literally your own biochemistry may be different, and the cravings that you feel are radically different than what someone else feels. So if your biochemistry is such that when you get cravings, like they're not that strong, versus they're life stopping. Oh my God, I need to have this substance, whatever it is. That's going to affect your ability, or at least the level to which you're going to need to bring your own internal decision in order to overcome that. There's also going to be, how fast does a substance clear from your system? You have support groups. What kind of stressors are in your life? There's a lot of pieces to that. So, and I only say that just to be careful, because there are people that struggle deeply with addiction for their whole lives. And again, something to be grateful for is by the term addictive personality, I don't have an addictive personality, which is really fortunate because both of my parents were addicts. Yeah. So that's another thing to be grateful for.
My dad has been a heroin addict for most of his life, and spent, we've talked about before on the podcast, but he spent time in prison. Did LSD. First drug he ever did was LSD when he was like 12.
Man, that's an intro.
And it's an intro. Like he didn't smoke pot until it was like the 5th drug he did. Back in the 70s, pot was the gateway to other drugs, and that was the drug that he did like last, basically. And I actually have an addictive personality, not to the extent I think that my dad does or some other members of my extended family, because drug addiction and alcoholism run on both sides of my family, but alcoholism in particular pretty strongly. But I think temperament is a big part. Like you were saying, kind of how people, the biological makeup of people, temperament's a big part of that.
Yeah.
And, or at least I believe that biology is a big component of how your temperament is actually made up, right? The kind of the way you tick inside. This is a slight tangent that is related to this, but as I was going through and kind of working this stuff up, thinking about the stuff we're talking about here, it made me realize that one of the things I assume, because like, the phrase difficult things are often worth doing.
Okay.
Right. So things are, because the reward tends to be pretty high, but most people don't do difficult things because it's hard. They don't really want to put in the work. Mm-hmm. And so what you have, and this is my assumption, is I assume this is partly why you see a Pareto distribution when it comes to like creative endeavors in particular. Right. So most people do nothing because it's difficult, regardless of whether they're talented or not. So some people may be talented, but they're lazy. So they kind of try and they show promise, but they're just lazy. And only a few people actually have the discipline, or maybe a better way to put it is the work ethic, to actually push through and succeed, to formulate the plan and stick to it and go. And then depending on the subject, they may also have talent. Generally they do. It kind of depends on what you're talking about. And so what you tend to see in basically every creative or production output endeavor, period, is that a very small minority of people produce almost like a disproportionately large percentage of the output.
Sure.
And you see that everywhere. Like between Elton John and Michael Jackson, they alone account for like half of the record sales ever. And I read an interesting statistic last night. 80%, this is not music related, but 80% of the agricultural production in Australia, which is a terrible place to grow agriculture given its landscape, but 80% of the production of their agricultural production is produced by 0.8% of their land mass.
Wow. Okay.
So less, yeah. So it's like, which basically means Australia is pretty big, that it's like the size of King County produces 80% of their crops.
Is that the only spot that gets any rain or something?
Yeah, it has a whole bunch of factors. It gets a consistent amount of rain, and it's on like a tectonic plate that over the last 10,000 years so frequently has, had lava come up and give nutrients to the soil. But it's like you see those kinds of, that's not really a person driven thing, but you see that with with jiu-jitsu, right? Like there's only a few world champions, and Gordon Ryan's a great example. He's pretty talented, but he also works way harder than everyone else.
Yep.
He's just the one who puts in more work. And who are the other people who are really good? The other ones who put in more work. Gary Tonin, the Danaher Death Squad in particular, Craig Jones, his old instructor, Lachlan Giles, Hodger Gracie, Andre Galvao. Like these are the guys who work their asses off. And so I thought that was a very interesting parallel to that Pareto style, that the distribution naturally of unequal outcomes.
Yeah, well, I mean, hard work pays off. I think for in my personal context, where I really got a visceral feel for that concept, and what who's the guy on Rogan that says get comfortable being uncomfortable? Might have been Goggins originally. Excuse me. Anyway, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. When I first started working out, I was out of shape, skinny, soft tube guy. But I very quickly realized that the more effort I put in, the better the results I would get. Now there's a delay, of course, just have one workout and wake up swole. Mm-hmm. But it became very viscerally connected that if I do this thing that is uncomfortable at the time, then I get this result at the end. And eventually, while you're uncomfortable, you can connect to that end goal. So you're not thinking about, I'm sore, I'm tired or whatever. It's I'm moving closer to this thing that I really want. And additionally, something that I found works for me a little bit. I know like Mike Tyson has touched on this. Basically, when you're doing something difficult like that, you imagine all of the other people who are going to wuss out and they can't hang with that level of work. And it's like your competition is just falling away because you're outworking them. Yep. Tyson would get up at 4:30 in the morning to go run. Says, well, why do you do that? This is why, the other guys are getting up at 5. So I got to get up even earlier and put in more work. So if you have, competitive tendencies, keep that in mind. Yeah. When you're in the middle of it and it really, really sucks, just imagine everybody else falling away. It's like, no, I'm gonna keep hanging in there. I'm gonna keep doing the work.
I think I think it was John Smith. He's a Olympic wrestler. He said something similar to Mike Tyson. He would get up at like 4. He'd get up in the middle of the night and go for like a 4-mile run. And when asked about it, he's like, well, it's say, 2 a.m. He's like, well, it's 11 a.m. in Russia or whatever time it is. And he's like, they're working out right now. So I need to be working out right now.
Yeah.
Let alone the fact that what he was actually doing was actually unhealthy because he wasn't getting enough sleep, but still, it was
definitely a point of diminishing returns there.
But it was the mindset for him. It was like, they're putting in the work, and if I don't do it, they're just going to, steamroll me, and it's I think that speaks to something that about discipline and the role that it has in helping you succeed. Now, because I think discipline in part is, it isn't, I think, a temperament issue. It's in part a temperament issue. I'm not temperamentally super disciplined. It's never been something that I would say comes easy to me. but it's something that I do because I like the rewards of it. And I understand the use of it. And otherwise I would have been really disciplined as a kid. Some people are just super disciplined. That's just how they are. They're good at set them a task and they'll do it. And those are usually the hyper efficient workers that, that like just get shit done. They're the ones who can work from 9 to 5 without getting up, and you don't know how, right? Whereas I can't do that. I've never been able to do that. I've always been like I get an hour, maybe an hour and a half. We're approaching an hour and a half on the podcast here. I'm going to get to about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and I'm going to peter out because I get too exhausted. Sure. And I need to recharge. Right. But, teaching yourself, first off, recognizing the importance of that discipline, and then sticking to it. Right. And just embracing the suck, as it were.
Exactly.
I think that's another Goggins saying, or is he like embrace the shit? He says something.
Back in the day when my workout partners, we actually like made little stickers and shirts and stuff that said "embrace the pain."
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really it. It's shifting your focus and connecting the parts that suck to good rewards that you're after.
Yeah.
And that can push you to do more of what sucks. It's like, I want more of the good stuff. I want to have more results. And once you can internalize that, then, basically it's game on. You will get good results.
Well, you'll also too, I think a big thing for me, when I'm, trying to think of things I want to do in life and I go through and I plan them, is I spend a good amount of time, like, with that planning, dissecting what it is truly that I'm asking myself to do. So, like, as an example, we talked a little bit about this, I think, a few weeks ago, but I bought a bunch of resistance bands to do resistance band training because we don't have weights at the gym, and I don't have them in my house, and I'm not going to pay to go to a membership. They're not even open anymore, so I can't do that anyways. And so I've been learning how to do resistance bands. And it's like, I would like to get a little bit stronger. I don't necessarily know if I want to get bigger, but it's like, what is it I'm asking myself to do though? How do I get stronger? It isn't as simple as once a week, I'm going to go watch a video of somebody do an all body workout. And then hopefully I get big by June. That's not how it works, right? Like, you need a plan. But what does that entail? Is it, I can write down that I want to go to the gym every day and do a different body part every day, but I have to truly internalize what the hell that means. Like, that means that because I do leg days on Monday, when I do lower bodies, that means that as part of Tuesday, my day on Tuesday is to be in pain. That's just part of my day. Part of my day on Tuesday is I may fall out of bed instead of stand up because my ass hurts so bad. Like, I may need to spend a couple, like 30 minutes to an hour stretching out my hamstrings, maybe because they're tight. It kind of depends on the exercise I'm doing, or my lower back gets tight because of doing rows and stuff. Like, maybe my bicep cramps because I did a hell of a bicep workout. But understanding those things and internalizing them, I think helps, at least it helps me become okay with the plans that I'm making and not flaking out on them. I think it goes along with that, being honest with yourself. I think people, they have this idea of what they want and it's a good goal. And I'd love to be in good shape, or I'd love to achieve this salary, or have this position in my job. And that sounds really good. And then once they realize the work that needs to be put in and what is actually truly required, it's like, well, some of those things I don't know if I want to do. It's like, if you think about it beforehand, before you actually break down, what do I have to do? It makes it a lot more palatable. Like, if like, as an example, if you're doing leg day and no one tells you that after doing leg day, tomorrow's going to suck. Like, if you just don't know, maybe the first time you ever done leg day, you just think, oh, it's fine. I've never been sore before. It's not going to be a problem. Look, when you wake up
call.
Yeah, literally you're going to wake up in pain. And especially if you're doing like heavy leg day, you're doing a lot of leg workouts. It's like, you may never lift a weight again because that shit's painful. Like, there's a reason that there's a leg day. Like, and everyone cringes, right? Like, no one's like, hey, we got arms today, and I'm sick. Like, no one's like, oh, my triceps, I can't do triceps. So no, it's like, everyone's like, leg day, fucking leg day.
That's how you can tell the true gym sickos. Those are the ones that look forward to leg day. It's
right.
Like, oh, you're psycho, man.
And it's no other day. It's leg day. And it's like, they internalize it. They embrace it. And once you, in some sadomasochist kind of way, you like look forward to that day, everything else becomes easier. And it's like, because you know that that's part of the journey to get whatever it is you want, even if you don't ever achieve it, you know, it's a part of the journey. And it's like, this is the sacrifice that I have to make to at least be aiming at the whatever goal it is I have, right? Otherwise, I mean, in bodybuilding in particular, why the hell would anyone ever bodybuild? The odds that you are going to win a bodybuilding competition are pretty small. Like just anyone in general, like, and you actually did it yourself, which is an incredible feat. And it's like, so that's nice that that happened, but you got to embrace those leg days in order to even try. Otherwise you just won't win. Someone who wants it more will do it. Right. And and that's actually the part of, like I said, I don't really like planning, but that's kind of the part of discipline and planning that if I liked a part of it, that would be it, is finding the things that I know are going to suck, but are going to make me a better person.
Yeah.
And even if, and even if they're not my favorite things to do, or I just don't like them, it's like, well, this is what it takes. And I want to get to the end, or at least get close to the end, like as an example with jujitsu, I don't ever plan on getting to an end to jujitsu. Right. But I want to put in all the hard work that's required to be closer than I am today.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like, but I don't know how far away I'm ever going to get, but I know what it means to get incrementally better and put in those shitty days of getting smashed and not being able to do techniques and movements and getting hurt and whatnot, because I know that at the end of the day and tomorrow, like I'm going to be, in a small amount better at least. Right.
Yeah. I try to reframe the, anytime something is uncomfortable, whether it's a workout, jiu-jitsu or whatever, that's where you earn your results. Mm-hmm. When you're doing something like that, whether it's, trying to get bigger muscles or learn a new technique or something, any of these physical world activities versus social stuff. Social can be different, but you want a physical result, or building a table, whatever. You're interacting with the physical world. You realize very quickly that there are no shortcuts.
Yeah.
So if you can reframe the uncomfortable parts of a long journey, say the journey to black belt, we know that anybody that has legitimate black belt had to earn it.
Yeah.
And it's a whole lot of work and a lot of suffering. So if you are on that journey yourself, understand that you are genuinely earning this thing that you're going after. So it's the putting up with that uncomfortable feeling, or drilling the same thing even though it's boring for 30 minutes or whatever. That's the earning portion of it. So if you reframe the suck into the gain of earning a step towards what you're after, I think that can help you stick with it quite a bit.
I'd be curious to see. I'd love it if someone tried to reframe the different belts in jiu-jitsu instead of there's a whole bunch of literature and like YouTube videos about like what to expect at every belt. Like a white belt should just survive, or a white belt should just show up. A blue belt should survive. A purple belt should develop a game plan and have their A game. A brown belt should refine everything, and then a black belt starts all over. Something like that. That's like roughly speaking what everyone says. Yeah. I'd love to see someone reframe all that with all the shitty things. Like a black belt or a white belt drowns, and then a blue belt crawls onto the land and then gets squished by a larger animal. And then a purple belt runs from a predator. Right. And then a brown belt is lazy or is bored. Right. And then a black belt becomes a child again. Like it just comes full circle, something like that. Right. Or, you kind of take all the negative aspects of those things where like, and this is like what you can expect. You can expect to die for 2 years, and then you can expect to die for another year or two. And then when you get your purple belt, you're going to be good, but now everyone's going to try really hard. And then when you're a brown belt, you're going to get bored. because you're just doing the same thing over and over again to refine it better. And then you get your black belt and you realize that you're just going to start over again and have fun.
Yeah.
It's something like that, right? I personally, that would resonate with me a lot. So kind of know like what kind of pain am I waiting for? What's coming down the pipe when I get my purple belt or my brown belt, right?
Like, yeah. So I think we have convinced people that planning is a good thing, or made a good case for it. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to be kind of a duh moment. Like, oh yeah, you should have a plan. But you can refine that concept quite a bit.
Yes.
And I'm gonna borrow from the late Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The first 3 habits are, very much in this same vein. First habits being, or habit number 1 is be proactive. Habit number 2, begin with the end in mind. And habit 3, put first things first. What does that mean? So the first habit of being proactive is understanding that the way he phrases it is in between stimulus and response, you have a choice. So what that means is, you can't control the things that happen to you in the world. Stuff happens to you. It might start raining on you. And how you respond to that can either be out of habit, it can be entirely emotional, or you can take that little time between the stimulus and the response, how you respond to it, to choose what that response is going to be. And that's super powerful. That's really where the power begins of being able to make effective changes in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that you have that choice doesn't mean life is fair, doesn't mean bad things don't happen, none of that. This is the real world. But there's always a choice of how you respond to a situation. And when you can firmly internalize that, then you've taken the first step and you've really you've grabbed the reins of your life. Begin with the end in mind. That really speaks to this initial process of planning. It's like, okay, I'm gonna choose how I respond to a goal, or I'm gonna create a goal. What's that gonna look like? And again, the example that Covey uses is that every house is built twice, meaning the architect designs and builds that house on paper and in his head or in the computer nowadays, in every detail before a single nail is driven. And then based on that first creation, you create the physical manifestation of that. So that's the mental process of creating a plan, laying it out on paper or on the computer, however it is that works for you, and then executing on that plan. Otherwise, it's effectively like a boat without a rudder.
Mm-hmm.
Life is going to happen. Your emotional situation is going to change. There's going to be different stressors in your life that are going to try and push you all kinds of different directions that have nothing to do with where it is you're actually trying to get. But if you take the time to plot out, these are the steps that are necessary to get me where I want to go, then you have the tools to, at the moment something changes, it starts raining or what have you, you can then analyze that based on how that lines up with your plan and how you can adjust that plan to still get to the same end goal.
Right.
If you're on a boat and you're trying to go across the lake and the wind starts blowing you off course, you can course correct. The goal is still the same. You may have a slightly different strategy because we have to adjust the rudder so that we're still pointing where we want to go.
Right.
And then the third habit, put first things first, that's just effective prioritization, which is really, really important because things are going to happen to you that seem very urgent. They're demanding your attention right now. The phone is ringing. Pay attention to me. Pay attention to me. It's urgent. It's right now. But you need to be able to evaluate in the moment whether or not that's even important toward your end goal. And the the book lays out, Seven Habits lays out what he calls a time management matrix. And basically it kind of creates a little grid of whether or not something is urgent and whether or not something is important. Because important, that's how you measure how this urgent thing is going to affect your end goal, right? So if it is going to get you a step closer, or by the contrary, take you a step further away, so you need to address it, then by definition, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, if the phone's ringing and you see on the caller ID, it's just some telemarketer, that's clearly not important. So what that leaves us with is things that are important and urgent. Well, then you got to deal with those right away. You know, your kid fell down and scraped his elbow. You need to address that right away. It's happening right now, and it's your child, so you want to take care of that. It is, by definition, important. There are things that are urgent but not important, and that could be, notifications on your phone, all kinds of distractions online that are vying for your attention. Right now, right now, right now. Pay attention to me, but you know that they're just not important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of good refinement can be done. And then there are things that are, they're not important and they're not even urgent. Those are the easy ones to get rid of, right? Those are like busy work, trying to make yourself look busy, or, typically Facebook, things like that. And then there are the important one is things that are important but not urgent. That's where the meat of this lies. Meaning, laying out a plan for your day, for example, is not urgent. That's something that you have to proactively say, okay, I'm going to do this thing because it's important. So by weighing the two factors of urgency and importance, you can then prioritize the steps that are that you're laying out for your day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can always keep that in the back of your mind, not only is this thing urgent and vying for your attention, but more importantly, is it genuinely important? And if you can make your decisions based on those factors rather than just how you emotionally feel about it at the moment, that's where your plan becomes truly effective. So,
yep, I like that. When I in my old job, I went through a similar transition to like become more effective, and I haven't read the book you're talking about, and so I didn't quite follow all of what he's suggesting, the author is, but I just decided that basically everything that came my way was, unless it was directly related to me needing to sell something. So like someone calls in and is like, sell me something, whatever product we sold. I just deemed it non-urgent and not important. I was just wholesale. Unless someone calls and asks for me directly about giving me money, I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the urgency portion of that is that you don't necessarily have any choice in that.
Yeah.
Those are the things that they're proactively vying for your attention. It could be, a coworker stopping by your cube wanting to have a conversation.
Yeah.
They're right there right now trying to get you to talk to them. And at that point, you need to evaluate, is this important or not?
Yep.
And it might be an important relationship. You want to keep going with that colleague, or it might be about an important matter. But usually, if they're just stopping by to chat, you have to acknowledge that this is not actually important.
Yep.
So you want to gracefully get them moving on their way so you can get back to things that actually are important.
Oh, yeah. I used to do that. And I managed to find a pretty good way to let my coworkers know, that I was busy. I would just, they'd say, hey, I'd be like, hey, how's it going? I got a couple of minutes. What can I do for you? Something like that. And then they'd usually speed up. But because I worked in the insurance industry, like car insurance, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so whenever a customer called, it was always urgent to them.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Right. Because if they didn't get to know whatever their question was, now it was a problem. And in my experience personally, it was almost universally never actually urgent or important for that matter, quite frankly.
Well, again, the urgency is kind of that's the frame of the how that fits into time.
Yeah.
It wants something right now. You still have to figure out if it's important or not.
Yep.
But it is right now trying to get you to do something.
Yeah. This is one of the things that actually is kind of a side tangent. One of the things that kind of burned me out of the insurance industry was that, with the exception of somebody who was like in an act, let's say you call and you're like, hey, Bo, my home is burning down right now. Or, hey, Bo, I was just T-boned by another car. Those things are both urgent and important.
Yeah.
But I'm not the one to call. You call the police. That's basically outside of that. A question about your coverage, paying your bill, or whatever else people would call about, given what my actual job wasn't important to me. Like, because we have people for that. Like my coworkers dealt with that. But insurance is one of those industries where it's so convoluted and people are spending lots of money on it that if they have to call, it's important because you're spending your time to call and ask about your bill. Like you're probably not happy and you're paying money and you don't want to, and you legally have to in this state. And so it's an important and urgent issue, especially if your bill's due like tomorrow, then it's like a problem, right?
There you go. Yeah.
Even though legally most insurance, not legally, but basically all insurance companies will extend coverage far past the date you're supposed to pay if you don't pay. But I remember running into issues with my boss in particular, because like I'm trying to do my job and people would call and ask for me because they like to talk to me. And they're like, hey, why did my bill change? And I would be like, I don't know. And then I'd transfer them because I don't know. And it's not my job to figure it out. And so I don't get paid for that. And my boss used to get mad at me and I'd be like, what are you paying me to do? You know, like I can do that if you'd like, but you're going to need to adjust my pay because you partly pay me to sell stuff and I get paid a commission for that. So I need a raise to account for the lack of time I can do that. Yeah. So I actually took it probably a little bit too far than what people should do. For anyone listening, I don't recommend necessarily doing what I did. I went pretty extreme on it. I basically was like, unless someone calls and asks to give me money, I don't want to talk to them. I'll call them back. It's not important to me. Don't come to my office. I said that nicely, but like, don't transfer clients to me. Don't transfer potential customers. Just, I'll call them back. Don't bother me. Find a more democratic way to do it. Yeah, I was just kind of an asshole about it, but I needed to make a change and I was really unhappy with where I was at. And so that was the easiest thing for me, was just to like scorched earth. Like no one talked to me for the next like 9 months so I can do my job. And it worked, but people weren't very happy with me afterwards because it wasn't the right way to handle it.
Along those lines, I am another thing to be grateful for is, communications technology in general have made it so that just about everything can be an asynchronous communication, meaning, synchronous would be a phone call or a Skype like we're doing now. And it's real time, versus asynchronous would be a text. You send me a message, I read it, I get back to you when I feel like it, and then you get back to me when you feel like it, etc.
Right.
So it's not happening simultaneously. And because of that, I very rarely answer my phone.
Yeah, me too.
That's what voicemail's for. Let me know what's going on. And I'm not always super quick to get back with text messages, because I really do not like being interrupted when I'm deep into a project of some sort.
Me too.
And the thought that somebody else is going to cause my device to make a noise or vibrate and interrupt what it is I'm doing, I'm not really down with that. Only because we have the tools. I mean, if it's truly urgent, you're probably going to call back a couple of times and I'll get the hint. But otherwise, it's not urgent, it's not important. I'll get back to you when I can.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
When we had Sean Carter on a couple weeks ago, and before we were setting up you and him and I were texting to set everything up. And I'm looking for the text right now.
Oh, where does he text like an old lady?
Yeah, he's like, you text like, see if I can make it before too much quiet time. It says, Bo, I know you text like an old lady, but I need to know your schedule soon. And that's true. He's given me shit for it before because like he'll text me or something and then sometimes I'll even see the text. It kind of depends. Oftentimes I don't, and then I'll remind myself, like I'm in the middle of something. I'm like, I'll get back to him. If I see it, I'm like, I'm in the middle of something. I'll go back to him when I'm done. And then like 3 days go by and then I remember that he texted me. And this will happen with my mom, my other friends who don't do jujitsu, who I grew up with. The only person I don't do this with is my girlfriend. Because I love her more than everyone else and I live with her. So
it's important.
Yeah, it's important that she doesn't think I'm ignoring her. But among other things, but I don't like to ignore her, but I don't like to ignore most people, but since I like her more than my friends, I want her in particular, to feel like I'm listening and to know that I'm listening. But yeah, that makes me chuckle because like I forget to text and then Sean gives me shit for it. He's like, you're an old lady. Like, do you know how phones work? I would say
that's a signal to the urgency. It's like, hey, this is time sensitive. And you're like, oh,
right.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Once a month I get a text from two of my close friends. We've been best friends since we were 12, since the 7th grade. And once a month I'll get a text from one of them because we're on a group chat together and it'll just be, Bo, are you still alive? That's the text. Because inevitably what will happen is like they'll be texting back and forth and I'll forget to text them back for like 3 days. Because maybe like it isn't directly related to me or like I don't have anything really to say or I'm busy and or I forget. And then or a couple of days have gone by and we haven't texted and one of them will be like, are you alive, Bo? And it's like, yeah, I'm here. Just I don't, care about soccer and you guys are talking about soccer. So I just let you chat for a couple of days about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important. I've got friends like that as well. Like, if somebody falls off the grid, so to speak, and I don't hear from them for a long time, certain friends, that's not concerning at all.
Yeah, I'm like that.
Sometimes they just unplug. Like, okay, not a big deal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm like that, and it's interesting. So my girlfriend and I, we go to Chelan often. So parents have a house out there and on the lake, and it's a 3-4 hour drive, and so we'll listen to podcasts, and we like to listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. So people, amateur sleuths who try and solve old cold crimes and stuff, cold cases, and they're super interesting. But there's like a common theme that comes up with a lot of them. There's many common themes, but one of the common themes is people not hearing back from their friend and then calling the police and being like, this person's missing.
Right.
That's like a common one. And in most of the crimes, it's like virtually all women. But every now and again, there's a boy, but whatever the case, it's usually like, I haven't heard from my friend in like a day or 6 hours or 8 hours, or, my sister didn't call me today and it's noon, like she's been kidnapped. And she always texts me. One of them actually in particular was like, my sister always texts me in the morning and she didn't text me. It's like, I think she's been kidnapped. And then sure enough, like she went on a date last night, didn't get back, like all that kind of thing. And, we listen to them and, and my girlfriend, she's always like, if something like that happens to you, like no one's going to know for like a week. She's like, if I'm gone, your parents and your friends aren't going to know for like a week or two, maybe longer. Because they just won't, if you don't get back to them in like 7 days, like it's not an abnormal thing. I've gone 3 months without calling my mom. And then we just both get busy. And that's when I think about that, it's kind of scary. It's like, well, if I'm ever abducted, like I'm already dead before my family even knows I'm gone. I'm already dead because it's been so much time will have passed. I
have to make it a point to not get abducted. Yeah.
Right. So, I wanted to, before we close, I remembered that I was going to mention the story, the gratitude story of work and how it pertains to my girlfriend and I dating. So, I was a salesman in my my office, and she was hired over the summer when she was in college to be the receptionist, which has a whole host of other jokes if you ever watch The Office, because of Jim and Pam. This is separate
That's
from
why
that.
you guys like that so much.
Yeah, well, I just think it's a good show, but
It is.
it's always very funny. But because of that relationship, but we had this team building exercise at our old boss's house, and we had a whole bunch of exercises. But one of the exercises, we all had to spend a couple of minutes and write down one thing that we liked or were grateful of, or whatever, about every single person that we worked with. And at this point, we weren't dating, and I give her a little bit of crap about this, but I was pretty sure she liked me at the time. And but I was not returning any of the affections. One, she was going back to college, and she was going to college out of state, so that didn't seemed unrealistic. And then two, I was actually genuinely concerned my boss would fire me if we dated. If it would have progressed that far. I didn't know if it would at the time, but and so we actually went a long time before we started dating, like well after she left working, because I was actually genuinely concerned about that. But so we're going around and we're talking about the things that we like about each other or whatever, and it's her turn, and she's going through hers, and she gets to me, and she says that one of the things she likes about me is that I'm serious but light. Like light-hearted, or like a light bulb drum. And I think she meant like lighthearted, serious but light. And sitting directly next to her was our oldest coworker named Marilyn. She was like in her late 70s, very old, or quite old. And and she actually was kind of hard of hearing. And she's right next to my girlfriend, and she turns to her and she says, "Did you just say he was a serious butt wipe?"
All right.
And so everyone died. Like everyone died of laughter from this, because they sound exactly the same.
Sure.
Especially if you say it with any kind of speed, they sound exactly the same. And so that has become a joke of ours for the last like 8 years now.
Serious about what? All right.
Yeah. And so
I like it.
yeah, it's I actually hopefully she doesn't listen to this podcast, because I got her a present for Christmas this year, and on it I put that it's from a serious butt wipe.
Nice.
So that'll hopefully she'll probably like that. But yeah,
That's cute.
So that's the gratitude, right, that she showed me, is by calling me a butt wipe.
Nice.
But so yeah, that'll if and when she does listen to this, that'll embarrass her. So that'll be fun. But yeah, so that's that actually, we went through all of my notes. That's the first time that's happened. So
Oh, fantastic.
that's what happens when I only write 1,200 words worth of notes.
I don't even know what 1,200 words looks like. I don't write enough to be counting my words.
It's it's about 2.5 pages
Oh,
typed.
jeez. Yeah.
It'd probably be closer to 2 pages fully typed, but I have indents and paragraphs and spaces and stuff, so it's 2.5.
Gotcha.
So it took me like half an hour. Not a lot.
Okay.
Had I spent more time, I would have had like 5 or 6 probably.
Wow. I'm a bullet point kind of guy. You see, I use Evernote pretty regularly, and it's usually just a run-on of bullets, either bullets or check marks.
Yeah.
If I've got a packing list for an event or something. But, yeah.
The first podcast we did, I did that, which we didn't air. The first one's the one we did outside.
Mhm.
I had done bullet points, and then I actually didn't take them with me because we were outside, but I had them in my head. And I realized that what happens is all of the bullet points, and then I'll have an idea about them, but I don't want to forget how I phrase and like articulate and construct the idea. So I'll try and type it out.
Yeah.
And I actually oftentimes won't even read. Sometimes I'll read verbatim what I've written, but oftentimes I'll change what I've written, because how I think about it, say right now versus when I wrote it a couple days ago, will change.
Sure.
But I want to know kind of what it is I was thinking exactly, so that I can adjust it and get to the bottom of where my brain was at on, in this case on Monday. Because otherwise I might forget, like I'm busy and my brain's everywhere all the time. I'm always thinking. So I don't want to, because maybe I come across a good idea, and if I don't articulate it, I may just lose the idea. It just goes away. And then we're talking about it and I can't remember what it was I wanted to say. And so that's actually why I write so much for these, is because, and probably why we don't even get to half of them, is because we just never talk about it, or the idea, I don't like it anymore, doesn't hold any weight. Or sometimes you'll bring something up that is a good explanation for why whatever idea I would explain wouldn't work. And so I don't even go into the idea, because it's like, okay, well, that actually answers the question of why I formulated that idea. And so there's no reason to go on with the 500 words I wrote about this idea, because we've kind of, we've already tackled it. But I find that it's more helpful for me to do it that way. But I'm also, like we've talked about before, I like to read versus listen to like books. And I'm the same way with writing. I like to write stuff out so that I can read it, and it helps me internalize it better. And then I can also cross out and revise and go through and change and kind of add to it and stuff like that. And so it just helps kind of get everything out of my head and flesh it out a little bit better.
Sure.
But
makes sense.
Sweet. Oh, well, do you have anything else, or should we?
I think this is good for this one.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, this is episode 15 of the Beyond Red and Blue podcast, where we talked
15
about
already. Wow.
15.
All right. Chugging right along.
Yeah. I think 15 total weeks. Exactly. I don't think we've skipped a week. So,
Nope.
So we got 37 more till we get to a year, which is crazy. And so, dude, I love it. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a good rest of the morning, afternoon, or evening. And stay tuned for, I believe, next week, possibly the week after, we will have resident black belt Trino Mendoza on to talk about some jiu-jitsu stuff, talk about what he likes to do, talk about the food he likes to eat, because he likes the keto style foods like I do, and kind of just get his philosophies on life. That's going to be super exciting. Yeah, that's it.
There we go.
Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.